No one claimed the last Apache woman until the lonely farmer paid for her freedom. Before we dive into the story, don't forget to like the video and tell us in the comments where you're watching from.
The wind dragged dry leaves across the dirt road. Ash Ridge didn't have many trees, but the few cottonwoods that lined the southern path were already bare, their branches stripped by cold air that had moved in early that year. Dust clung to the sides of buildings. Most windows were closed. Some were boarded. A few doors creaked from loose hinges in the wind. The sun hung low and gold, throwing long shadows across the main street. Clay Mercer rode into town from the West Road on a tired, gelding named Prince. He didn't come for conversation. He needed horseshoes, oil for the lamp, maybe a sack of flour. The trip should have taken less than an hour. Get what was needed, ride back. He had fencing to fix before frost. He didn't get off the horse right away. The blacksmith was still heating iron. A couple of local men leaned against a rail, eyeing the flames, arms crossed. No one looked up as Clay passed. They knew him by now, the man who lived alone outside town, who only came in when he needed supplies. The one whose wife had died 3 years back and who hadn't remarried, hadn't moved, hadn't said much of anything since he guided Prince past the livery and toward the general store. That's when he saw her. She stood behind the cattle gate at the edge of the corral, not inside with the animals, behind the wooden posts, as if she were livestock herself. A rope stretched across the gate to keep her in place. Her arms hung at her sides. Her wrists were swollen, the skin red and scab where iron cuffs had dug in. One was still latched to her left wrist, dragging a short length of chain with it. Her ankles were bare. No shoes. Her hair hung straight and black past her shoulders, tangled in places, wind blown in others. She didn't shiver, though the wind had a bite. She didn't crouch or plead. She stood upright, shoulders back, chin slightly raised. Clay stopped walking. The dress she wore was deerskin, Apache style, or it had been. It looked like it had been beautiful once, beaded at the bottom, fringed at the arms. Now it was torn along the side and across the chest, exposing a deep line of cleavage. Her chest rose and fell steadily. The neckline gaped, frayed and slack, too wide after weeks of wear and damage. He looked once and turned away. She wasn't bound to the post, just fenced in, like they didn't expect her to try and run. Two men nearby stood with arms folded. One spit, the other kicked at the dirt. Neither looked at her. Not directly. Clay didn't speak right away. He stepped closer to the fence, stopping a few feet back. The woman didn't move. Her eyes locked onto his. No flicker, no question, no welcome. She was young, younger than he expected. Early 20s, maybe 24. Her face was thin, but not gaunt. Her cheekbones high. There was dried blood on her lip. Her body, even in the ripped dress, was clearly strong. Curved hips, strong legs, shoulders square. Her feet were dirty. She held a small gray stone in one hand. Behind Clay, the blacksmith's hammer rang once. Then silenced. He turned to one of the men. "Why is she still here?" The man shrugged. "She's Apache. Army rounded up most of them. This one was left behind. Won't speak English. Won't say who she belongs to. Nobody claimed her. What happens if nobody does? Sheriff said she'd be shipped east. Or worse. Honestly, don't matter to most folks. She's not from here. Then why is she still here?" The man looked at him sideways. "Takes money to send her off. Government won't pay. Sheriff won't use county funds. Someone's gotta want her bad enough to pay." Clay didn't answer. He glanced back toward her. She hadn't moved. Same posture. Same stare. The wind moved her hair slightly, but her body was still as stone. Her chest rose again. He looked at the wrist with the iron cuff, the dirt on her collarbone, the bruising under her right eye. "How much?" Clay asked. The man blinked. "What? How much for her release?" "You serious?" Clay reached into the pouch at his side, pulled out a small coin sack. "Silver coins. Enough." He held it out. The man hesitated. "She's not mine to sell. You said someone has to want her. I'm here." The man glanced at his companion, then at the gate. Finally, he took the coin. "No refunds." Clay nodded once. He stepped forward, unlatched the gate. The hinge creaked. The chain on her wrist rattled softly. She still hadn't flinched. He walked toward her. Up close, the smell hit, Smoke, sweat, days without a wash. The skin at her neck was red from sun. Her eyes were dark and unmoving. "I'm not going to touch you," he said low. "You walk on your own." She didn't respond, but she stepped out, one bare foot, then the other. Her body shifted slightly, just enough to move, but not expose more than already had been. She still gripped the stone. Clay turned and walked back toward his wagon. He didn't look back to see if she followed. She did. She climbed in without help. The wooden bed of the wagon creaked under her weight. He took the reins, nudged the horse forward, and 01 said goodbye. The road out of Ash Ridge was rougher than usual. The last rain had cut gullies into the edges. Clay kept his eyes forward. He could feel her behind him, bare feet against the boards, breath steady. He didn't ask anything. She didn't speak. The sun dropped low. Shadows grew. Coyotes howled faint in the distance. They stopped just outside the timber line for the night. Clay built a fire. He laid out 2 blankets on the ground near the wagon. He brought her a tin cup of water, a small piece of bread wrapped in cloth. She took both, ate slowly, didn't thank him, didn't meet his eyes. Her dress sagged open more when she sat. He didn't watch, but he saw enough to know she had nothing left that hadn't been taken or worn down. Her curves were visible, not out of choice, but because nothing she wore covered them anymore. The neckline had collapsed. Her breasts shifted beneath the cloth as she breathed, the split in the fabric revealing more than was decent. But she sat as if nothing was exposed, as if shame didn't apply anymore. He pulled off his coat and laid on the blanket near her. She didn't reach for it. She finished eating, then lay down with her back to the fire. Clay sat by the flames until only embers remained. He thought of his wife. Sarah had died in that house 3 winters ago. Fever, fast and cruel. They'd buried her before the ground froze. He hadn't spoken to anyone about it since. Never wanted to. The farm stayed the same. He kept it running, but quiet. Always quiet. Now, there was someone else. She hadn't said a word. But she hadn't run. That night, she slept with her boots off. She kept one hand curled around the stone, the other under her head. Clay didn't sleep much. The fire cracked now and then. Her breathing never changed. In the morning, they rode on. Neither of them looked back toward Ash Ridge. The road turned narrow as the wagon reached the edge of Clay Mercer's land. A weathered post marked the boundary, barely visible beneath a scrub of tall grass and dry brush. The property stretched wide and mostly empty, bordered by low hills to the east and a line of twisted pines near the rear. No fences up front, just space, silence. Clay liked it that way. He didn't speak during the last hour of the ride, and neither did she. He could see the house as they crested the ridge, wood-sided, single story, with a stone chimney and a narrow porch shaded by a rusted tin roof. The barn sat off to the right, faded red, with one panel missing from the upper loft door. There were 2 sheds further behind, one for tools, the other for wood. Everything was simple, square, and functional. It had stayed the same since Sarah died, that he pulled the wagon around back. The wheels creaked. He tied the horse, stepped down stiffly, then offered a hand to the woman. She didn't take it. She climbed out on her own, barefoot again. Her ankles had small cuts now from the rough wagon floor. Her dress dragged in the dirt. The tear at the chest had opened slightly more, not dramatically, but enough that the top curve of one breast showed when she shifted her arm. She didn't adjust it. She didn't look down. She simply stood there, still holding that smooth stone in her palm. Clay opened the back door. "This way," he said. The house smelled of dust and dry wood. The stove hadn't been lit in 2 days. He dropped his pack on the table, then set a tin pot on the burner. Taya hovered just inside the threshold, not stepping past the doorway. She scanned everything, the ceiling, the windows, the wall hooks. She didn't remove the stone from her hand. She said nothing. "I'll fix the fire. You can sit if you want." He didn't expect her to, but after a moment, she crossed the floor quietly and eased down onto a low wooden stool near the corner. She kept her knees together, arms folded. Her back didn't touch the wall. Clay lit the stove, waited for the flame to catch. He brought out 2 bowls, ladled in stew from the pot he'd reheated. The food was simple: beans, a bit of smoked meat, onions grown from the garden. He set one bowl near her, the other across the table. She didn't move that he sat first. He didn't eat right away, just watched the steam curl off the top. His leg ached from the ride. He shifted his boot beneath the table and glanced over. She was looking at the food now, but not reaching. "You hungry?" he asked. She finally looked at him. "Salt," she said. Just that word. Clay stood, grabbed the tin shaker off the counter, and set it beside her bowl. She took it, shook once, ate with small bites. He watched her eat for a few seconds, then turned his eyes away and started on his oat. Tea was the first meal he'd eaten across from someone in 3 years. They finished in silence. When she set her spoon down, he cleared the bowls. "Wash them." She watched his hands move in the water. "Bathroom's out back," he said. "Pump's cold. Water's clean." She stood slowly. Her knees cracked faintly. She glanced once at the front door. Not toward the road, just checking. He noticed that. Always checking the exit. He didn't stop her when she stepped out. She was back in 5 minutes. Wet strands of hair stuck to the sides of her face. Her sleeves were damp. She looked colder now, but cleaner. The dirt was gone from her arms. Her face was bare. Clay handed her a towel without a word. She took it, dried slowly, then looked at the floor, uncertain. He picked up an old quilt from the back of the chair and laid it on the bed. "You sleep there. I'll take the chair." She didn't argue. She lay down stiffly, still in the same torn dress. The blanket barely covered her knees. The neckline fell open again when she turned, but she didn't fix it. She turned her face toward the wall. Clay didn't undress. He sat on the chair beside the stove, boots on, arms crossed. Sleep didn't come quick. He kept thinking about the look in her eyes when she asked for salt. Not the word itself, but the way she said it. No fear. Just need that he'd expected something else. Resistance. Panic. Maybe even anger. But she was just quiet. Same as him, if he hadn't meant to bring anyone home. That wasn't the plan. But when he'd seen her at that gate, standing like that, barely dressed, unclaimed, alone, it sat wrong with him. Not just pity, not just guilt. Something in the way she looked at people. Like she already knew what they were going to do and didn't care anymore. He couldn't leave her there. Not like that. Not chained up. Not in front of those men that he'd done things in the past he wasn't proud of. Young man's choices. Rode with men who liked to settle scores. Left some scars behind. Picked up more of his own. But he'd changed after Sarah. He'd buried that old part of himself in the ground with her. Now here was this woman who didn't scream, didn't beg, just waited. And for some reason, he'd bought her freedom. He watched the fire flicker in the stove until the room dimmed. Around midnight, she stirred. Not awake, but not sleeping peaceful either. Her hands gripped the quilt. Her legs twitched. He heard her whisper something soft, not English. He didn't move, just watched. She turned over once more and finally settled. Her breathing evened out. Clay shifted in the chair, adjusted the coat over his lap. The fire burned low. Outside, wind scraped across the windows. In the silence, he remembered something he hadn't thought of in a long time. Sarah's voice, laughing in the field one spring, her hands muddy from planting, the way she used to hum when she worked. That sound had disappeared from the house the day she died. But now, the quiet wasn't so empty. There was someone else here. Not family. Not friend. Not yet. But alive. Clay leaned his head back, eyes half closed. The woman across the room turned again, pulling the blanket closer to her chest. Her hand, still holding that stone, finally relaxed. He didn't know her name. But she was here, and she hadn't left. That was enough for now. The sun hadn't cleared the hills, yet when Clay opened the door to check the sky, thin clouds moved slowly above the ridgeline, the kind that meant the day would stay cold. The wind had quieted. The soil was frozen hard enough that his boots made no imprint in the dirt. Good weather to mend the chicken coop before snow came again. Good day for work. Inside the house, it was still. He turned to look. She was awake. Not sitting up, not speaking, just watching him from under the edge of the quilt. Her eyes followed him. No alarm, just alertness. Her hand was already gripping the stone again. He'd noticed the way she slept. Never on her back, never without that small gray shape curled in her fingers. He hadn't asked why. "You want to eat?" he said. And no answer. She sat up slowly, Wincing slightly, one hand pressed her ribs. Her dress had slipped off her shoulder again, and for a brief moment he saw the curve of her breast, the dark line of cleavage exposed by the torn neckline. He looked away and moved toward the stove. She didn't fix the dress. She stood, stretched, again with her hand at her side like something pulled or cracked underneath. Then she walked to the table and sat without invitation. He brought bread, beans, and a tin cup of well water. She ate slowly, not with fear, just with caution, as if each bite needed to be proven safe before trusting the next. Afterward, she followed him outside without a word. The air cut sharper outside. Clay wore his coat. She didn't have one. Just that same torn dress and her shawl from the wagon, wrapped tight over her shoulders. The hem of the dress had frayed further, revealing her calves. Her feet were now wrapped in strips of cloth he had given her the day before. Still not shoes, but better than bare skin. She didn't complain. Not once. They walked toward the coop behind the barn. Chickens scattered as they approached, clucking softly, their tracks skittering across the frozen ground. Clay knelt beside the broken panel, assessing the split frame. "You hold this," he said, pointing to a loose board. "Here." She crouched next to him and gripped the wood without hesitation. Her fingers were cut, cracked at the knuckles. She didn't flinch. He worked beside her, driving nails, reinforcing joints. The work was quiet, simple, necessary, the kind of work that left no room for talking. An hour passed. Then she stood abruptly and stepped away, clutching her side again. He straightened up. "You hurt?" She didn't respond. "Let me look." She shook her head. "Step back." "I ain't gonna touch," he said. "Just want to see what's wrong." She hesitated, then slowly turned, lifting the shawl and pulling down the neckline of her dress on one side. Her rib cage was bruised, deep purple spreading along her side, faint green along the edges. Clay's jaw tensed. It wasn't new. It had been healing for days. Probably cracked. Maybe worse. How long? Still no answer. He looked at her face, then stepped back, giving her space. "I've got something inside for pain. Not strong. Won't fix a break, but'll help." She looked at him, then nodded once. They walked back to the house. Inside, he opened a drawer, took out a small jar of salve. His late wife had made it from pine and root oils, meant for burns and bruises. He left it on the table beside her and turned his back. She applied it herself. The scent filled the room, sharp, earthy. When she finished, she sat again, arms crossed, eyes on the fire. After a moment, she spoke. "Army took my brothers." Clay looked up. She wasn't looking at him. "Just the wall. I was hiding. They found me a day later." She rubbed her wrist where the shackle scars still showed. He didn't ask for more. "I'm not going back," she said. "You won't." She looked at him finally, long and steady. "You didn't ask what I did." "I don't care." She nodded once, and that was the end of it. They spent the afternoon splitting wood. She watched him work for a while before picking up the axe herself. He didn't stop her. Her swings were awkward at first, too wide, not enough weight behind them, but she adjusted. Quick learner. He handed her gloves without a word. By late afternoon. Sweat had darkened the front of her dress. The cleavage from the torn seam deepened as she moved, revealing the swell of her breasts beneath the fabric. Clay noticed. He looked, then looked away. But the image lingered, not in a lewd way, just there, present, undeniable. She was beautiful, and that beauty was obvious, even when unspoken. Maybe especially then. He made stew again that night. This time, she helped. Cut vegetables, stirred the pot, said nothing but stayed near. They ate in silence, but it wasn't heavy. Just still. After, she cleaned the bowls, dried them, set them back where she'd found them. When it grew dark, Clay stoked the fire. "You want another blanket?" he asked. She nodded. He brought one from the cabinet and handed it over. She laid down in the same spot, boots off, stone in hand. This time, she left the shawl folded on the chair. He sat across from her again, in the same place. The stove warmed the room. He thought about her words earlier, about her brothers, about hiding, about the moment she decided to speak at all. She hadn't asked him anything. Not yet. Maybe she never would. That night, before sleep, she turned on her back for the first time. Her hand still held the stone. Her eyes closed slower. Her breathing deepened. Clay watched the fire die down. He felt the weight of her trust settling into the house. Not spoken, not given freely, but growing, and he didn't move, not even when the room went dark. The storm came 2 days later, without warning. It rolled over the hills before dawn, slow and gray at first, then sharp and violent, wind slamming against the porch and whistling through the window cracks. Clay woke to the sound of the barn door banging loose and the roof moaning above him. He stood and moved to the door, testing the latch. It held, for now. Behind him, she stirred. He glanced over. She was already sitting up, the blanket gathered around her waist, hair loose down her back, damp from sweat. She hadn't cried out in the night, but her brow was damp. She'd had a dream. He could tell. The way her shoulders were tense, the way she blinked slower than usual, as if returning to reality took effort he didn't ask. Instead, he turned toward the stove, stoked the coals, added wood until the fire caught again. Outside, the wind picked up. Snow hit the windows in fast, sideways bursts. The kind that stuck. "We're not going out today," he said. "Chickens'll survive a day. You'll freeze in that dress." She was quiet, then looked at him. "You got more clothes?" Clay rubbed the back of his neck. "My wife's things still in the back closet." She nodded once that he led her down the narrow hallway to a small room on the left. The door creaked when it opened. The air inside was stale, unused. A single window looked out over the east field. Dust coated the edge of the dresser. He opened the top drawer. Inside were folded skirts, undershirts, shawls. All clean, all untouched since Sarah died, that he didn't reach in. Just step back. She didn't hesitate. She stepped past him, fingers light on the edge of the dresser. She pulled out a dark wool skirt, a cotton blouse. Simple, practical. She glanced at him once. He turned his back and stepped out of the room. She emerged 10 minutes later wearing the blouse and skirt. The fabric fit loose on her frame, but not poorly. The neckline was modest, high enough to cover everything the torn dress had exposed. Still, her figure was clear. The curve of her waist, the fullness of her chest beneath the cotton, the way the skirt moved around her hips that he looked once. Then turned toward the fire. "Better?" he asked. She nodded. "Warm." That was enough. They spent the morning inside. She sat by the stove, sewing a tear in the shawl. He shaved in the kitchen basin, watching her in the reflection of the window. Around noon, the wind eased. Just a little. Clay stood, stretched, and moved toward the front window. Snow had already piled half a foot on the porch. The barn roof sagged with weight. The woodshed looked buried up to the base. He could see no tracks, no signs of life outside. He turned back and caught her watching him. "You ever lived through snow?" he asked. She shook her head. "We moved with the season. Mountains sometimes, but not like this. You'll hate it by February." She didn't smile, but she didn't look away. Clay moved to the stove, stirred the pot from the night before. Still edible. He split bread, handed her half. They ate side by side, legs stretched toward the fire. Then, unexpectedly, she spoke. "You married long?" Clay didn't answer right away. 7 years. "She died 3 years back. Fever." She nodded. No apology. No question. "You?" "No husband. No children." Clay swallowed hard. For a moment, he realized something. He'd been assuming she was married once. That someone had lost her, or worse, sold her. But maybe not. "Your name," he said. "You never told me." "Taya." He said it once under his breath, testing the sound. She watched his mouth, then looked away. "You want to ask me something?" she said. He raised an eyebrow. "You've been looking like you do." He paused. "Why didn't you run?" She didn't answer at first. Then finally, nowhere to go. He nodded. It made sense. Not because she couldn't run, but because running to what? The snow kept falling. That evening, the light dimmed earlier than usual. Wind died down, but the weight of the storm hung heavy. Inside, the house felt smaller, warmer, but closed in. Taya pulled her chair closer to the fire. Clay sat nearby, rubbing the old ache in his leg. She noticed. "Bad fall. Horse. 3 winters ago. I limp when it gets cold." She didn't pity him, just nodded. He leaned forward to adjust the logs. She moved too, reaching out, her hand brushing his as she steadied a shifting piece of wood. He froze. So did she. Their hands were close, almost touching. Then she placed her palm fully over his. It wasn't a grab. Just a touch. A deliberate one. Steady. Warm. Clayton moved that he looked at her. Really looked. Her face was calm. Her eyes clearer than he'd seen them, yet that he turned his hand, just slightly, enough for his fingers to catch hers. The moment stretched. Quiet. Still. Then she pulled her hand back and sat straight again. Neither of them spoke. Later, when she lay down, she didn't turn to the wall. She stayed on her back, the quilt over her chest, eyes closed. Her breathing was even. Clay stayed by the stove. His hand still felt the warmth of her skin. That night, no dreams shook her. No sounds came from her sleep. And for the first time in years, he didn't feel like the only living soul in the house. By the time the snow melted, the land looked different. The edges of the field had softened, the fence lines buried, then slowly re-emerging, brittle with moisture. The days stretched longer now, the sun pushing in earlier through the cracks in the shutters. Clay had started sleeping with the window cracked again. He said it was to keep the room aired. Truth was, he liked the sound of her breathing from the next room. She no longer slept on the floor. The small back bedroom, the one Sarah used to keep locked for sewing, had been cleared out over 2 days of quiet effort. Clay didn't explain it. He just started moving tools and crates from the room to the shed. Taya didn't ask what he was doing. She simply started sweeping. That's how it went now. Silent cooperation. Unspoken rhythm. She wore the same few clothes every day, rotated and washed by hand in the basin behind the house. He offered her coins once, to buy more when he next went to town. She only said, "Not yet." He understood. Too many eyes. Too many words. Instead, she took the worn cotton dress she liked best. One with small buttons up the front, snug around her waist, and sewed the torn seam by the neckline closed. It no longer showed her cleavage like the first days, but the outline of her figure was still clear when she bent over the basin or walked across the yard in the late sun. Clay tried not to look when she moved like that. Sometimes he failed. Other times, he caught her glancing at him, her expression unreadable that he spent the morning fixing the west fence. She came to help. He gave her gloves again. She worked without complaint, hammering nails into the rail posts, eyes focused, hands steady. When a plank slipped and scraped her arm, she didn't cry out, just hissed under her breath and moved on. At midday, they sat under the bare cottonwood by the stream. "You always work this land alone?" she asked. Clay leaned back on his elbows, legs stretched, since Sarah died. "I had a hand before that, a boy from down south. He left when the war whispers started again. Folks scared of what's coming. And you, I've had enough of men with rifles. Whatever comes, it stays out there." He nodded toward the hills. She was quiet for a moment. "Then, I used to walk those ridges. Before all this, you could see 3 valleys from the top. My brothers could name every one. You miss them?" Her jaw tightened. She picked at the dirt between her fingers. "Every day." Clay didn't push. He handed her a tin canteen. She drank without looking at him. That night, he cooked again. Salt pork, cornmeal, beans. She chopped onions. They ate on the porch for the first time, wrapped in blankets against the breeze. The sky was clear, stars visible. She leaned back, head tilted, watching the dark. "You afraid of dying?" she asked suddenly. Clay took his time. "Wasn't. Then I lost her. Then I was. Now." He shrugged. "I'm not looking for it. But I'm not hiding either." Taya turned her face toward him. The lantern light caught her cheek, the curve of her neck. "I'm still hiding." He looked at her then, not just a glance. He really looked. "You don't have to." She nodded, but her hands were clenched tight in her lap. The next morning, she touched his hand for the second time. They were clearing brush from behind the barn. A root caught her foot. She stumbled. He caught her by the arm. When she steadied, she didn't let go. Instead, she turned and laid her hand on top of his. Light, deliberate. Clay didn't pull away. She looked at their hands, then up at him. Her eyes didn't flinch. He could feel his pulse in his throat. He opened his mouth, but no words came. She let go first. That night, she carved something into the edge of the porch with the point of a knife. Clay didn't see it until morning point, 2 small shapes, simple lines. Not letters, not initials, symbols. One looked like a mountain. The other, a flame duct. He didn't ask. The days kept stacking. They prepared the field for planting. She learned to seed rows. He showed her how to tie trellises from wire and split branches. She watched his hands closely, repeating each motion without needing correction. He hadn't touched his wife's old things in years. Now Taya wore one of her belts, looped over her hip, the leather cracked and dark. It fit her differently, but he didn't mind. He caught himself once, standing in the doorway, watching her move across the yard, the wind tugging at her hair. Her skirt clung to the back of her legs. Her blouse lifted slightly when she stretched to hang laundry. His eyes followed the slope of her back, the way her waist curved. She turned and saw him, but he didn't look away. Neither did she later, when she passed him on the steps. Her arm brushed his. On purpose, that he couldn't sleep that night. Not from worry, from something else. Something heavier, quieter, that she hadn't left, that she touched his hand, that she was here, and he wanted her to stay. Clay woke before sunrise to the sound of hooves on the road. It wasn't the regular clip of a local passing through. It was heavier, slower, deliberate, more than one rider. He pushed the quilt aside, stood by the window, and peered through the slat point. 3 men on horseback were coming up the road. Not fast, but not aimless. They were headed straight for the house. He stepped away from the window, pulled on his shirt and coat, and reached for the rifle leaning against the doorframe. It hadn't been fired in over a year. He hoped that wouldn't change today. Taya was already up. She stood near the kitchen, watching him, face unreadable. "Who are they?" she asked. "Don't know yet." He didn't tell her. He had a guess. Clay stepped onto the porch, rifle held, but not raised. The riders pulled up a few yards from the fence, dust settling around them. The man in the center was tall, well-fed, with a press coat and clean boots that didn't match the dirt road. The others flanked him, one thin and twitchy, the other heavy-set and quiet, both carrying holstered revolvers. All 3 looked like they were used to asking questions and expecting answers. The tall man spoke first. "Morning." Clay nodded once. "Morning. We're looking for someone. Apache woman. About yay tall, long hair. Came through Ash Ridge a while back. Sheriff said she was claimed. She was. By you. Yes. She here." Clay didn't move. "She is." The man exhaled slowly, as if the answer annoyed him. "Name's Silas March. I represent a landholder from down near Bisbee. Had a claim on a group of Apache prisoners taken in August. This one's a runner. Part of a transport that got scattered. He's owed compensation." Clay kept his eyes level. "I paid silver for her release. She's not a prisoner now." "That might be, but she's still listed on federal registry. Technically speaking, she's property, which means she's either to be transferred or returned. Your silver doesn't change that. She's not going anywhere." March shifted in his saddle, less polite now. "Sir, I don't think you understand. I've got orders to retrieve her. Doesn't have to get messy." Behind Clay, the door opened. Taya stepped out slowly, wrapped in the old shawl, calm but firm. She stood beside Clay, her bare feet on the wooden boards, shoulders straight. Her eyes locked onto March. "I'm not going with you," she said. March tilted his head. "Ma'am, it ain't personal." "Yes, it is." Clay didn't look at her. He just spoke flatly. "You turn around. You ride out. You don't come back." March stared. The tension hung heavy. One of the riders flexed his fingers near his belt. "You pull iron on this land," Clay said, eyes on the twitchy one. "You won't leave with both lungs." Silence. March studied Clay, then Taya, then the rifle. Finally, he lifted his reins. "Have it your way." They turned, rode off. Clay watched them until they disappeared down the hill. Then he stepped off the porch, paced the edge of the yard for a while, eyes scanning the tree line, making sure they didn't circle back. When he returned, Taya hadn't moved. "You knew they'd come." "I figured someone would. Eventually." She sat down on the porch steps, wrapping the shawl tighter. Her hand shook now, just a little. "I thought I was done running," she said. "You are." She looked at him, unsure. "They'll come back. I'll be ready." Her eyes studied his face. "Why?" He didn't answer right away. "I don't know how to say this right," he finally said. "But you're not something I did for charity. You're not." Here, because I felt sorry for you. I brought you home, but you stayed, and I care about that. She blinked slowly. Her throat moved like she was swallowing something difficult. I never asked you to fight for me. You didn't have to. They sat in silence for a while. The wind moved through the branches. Later, she came into the house, pulled one of Sarah's blankets from the chest, and laid it over the chair where Clay sat at night. She didn't speak, Duddy didn't either. That evening, he carved a new notch into the porch post, right below the symbols Taya had made. Not initials, not a name, just a mark. She saw it the next morning. She didn't ask what it meant. She just touched it with her fingers, then touched his hand, not briefly, not in passing. This time, she held it. The nights turned warm again by mid-April. The frost was gone, but Clay kept the stove lit a few hours past sundown, not for heat, but for the comfort of habit. Outside, the ground was finally workable. The air smelled like damp earth in the slow return of green. The hens started laying again. The days moved on, measured in small, repeating tasks. Fence mending, seed rows, sharpening blades dulled by winter. Nothing dramatic, just motion. But for the first time in years, Clay didn't mind the routine. Taya had changed too, though not in loud ways. She spoke more, but only when she needed to. When she walked, it was no longer with tension in her spine or quick glances at the door. Her shoulders rested naturally now. She didn't hold the stone as often. One night, he found her standing barefoot on the porch, arms wrapped around her waist, eyes on the tree-ling. No wind, no threat, just quiet. He stepped beside her. You all right? She didn't answer at first. Then, softly, I had a dream. He waited. I was back in the canyon. Not the real one, the one we used to live in before the soldiers. It was still full of firelight and voices. I could smell mesquite burning, hear them laughing. Then it all stopped, like someone took a breath and held it. I looked around, and everyone was gone. No sound, no smell, just me, standing there, holding my stone. Clay didn't speak. I woke up, she said, and I didn't cry. I just looked at the ceiling and waited to feel something. She paused. I think I've run out of tears. That's not good, is it? He answered carefully. Maybe that just means you've survived more than most people ever have. She looked at him, studying his face. Then, do you think I'm broken? No, how do you know? Because I've seen broken. You get quiet. You stop moving. You stop wanting anything. You're still here. You're still trying. She breathed out slowly. I didn't used to like silence. Now I can't fall asleep without it. It's the same for me. She leaned against the post, not touching him, but close. Clay didn't step away. He thought about what he hadn't said, about how often he'd woken up in the night over the last year, listening for her breathing in the other room, about the way he looked for her silhouette against the garden light in the early mornings, about the way his hand remembered the weight of hers without needing to think that he didn't say it, but he thought it. Later that night, the storm came suddenly, not thunder, just wind, hard and angry. It slammed the shutters and whistled through every crack in the frame. Taya woke gasping. He heard it from the front room. He rose instantly, stepped to her door, paused. Can I come in? He asked through the wood. Silence, then yes. She sat on the edge of the bed, knees pulled up, hands shaking. Her hair was damp with sweat. Her eyes were wild, disoriented. Clay didn't reach for her. He sat down on the floor beside the bed, arms resting on his knees, head low. I saw them, she whispered. The soldiers. I was hiding in the rocks. My brother crawled toward me. He was shot before he got there. Clay said nothing. He didn't try to offer comfort he couldn't back up. He just sat, present, real. After a long time, she slid off the bed and sat beside him, not touching him, just close. Then, slowly, she moved her hand toward his dot. He let her. Her fingers slid between his. Cool at first, then warmer. I don't want to forget them, she said, but I don't want to keep living there either. You don't have to forget to move forward. She nodded. Once, they stayed like that for a long time. No words, just the wind outside, the old wood groaning in the gusts. When she finally leaned against him, her head to his shoulder, he didn't move. He just breathed with her, matched her rhythm, waited for her to settle. She did. The storm passed by morning, and when the sun came, she didn't flinch at the light. That day, when she passed him in the garden, her hand brushed his again. This time, she didn't let go. The first wildflowers bloomed in late May, small, yellow, stubborn things pushing through dry soil, as if refusing to believe winter had ever been real. Clay noticed them along the edge of the fence line while repairing a broken post. Taya was kneeling nearby, planting squash seedlings in neat rows. Her hands were caked in dirt to the wrists, and her face was streaked with sweat. She didn't seem to notice. She worked like she had something worth growing. That was new. The house had taken on a different feel, too. Not bigger, but warmer. Two mugs always sat by the stove now. Two sets of boots by the door. Clay no longer placed tools across the empty half of the table. Taya no longer checked the door before bed. There were small things, too. A woven strip of cloth she'd nailed across the window frame for decoration, the way she now hung herbs above the sink to dry. He hadn't asked her to do any of it. She hadn't asked permission. They had become a house, and no one said it out loud. That morning, Clay found her standing on the porch, arms crossed, staring at the wood post where he'd carved his mark. The notch sat just under her cymbals, still sharp. She ran her fingers over it like she was remembering something, then turned and looked at him. "Did you love her?" she asked, without softness. Clay didn't answer right away. He stepped up beside her. "Yes," he said. Taya nodded. "Do you still?" Clay looked out at the yard, where the wind moved slow through the grass. "I don't know. I don't think love goes away, but it changes, gets quieter, like an echo." She looked at the carving again. "I don't want to take her place." "You haven't." Another long silence. "I used to think if I got close to anyone again, it would mean I let everything else go," she said. "The pain, the loss, like I'd be betraying them. And now, I think staying alive is the only way I honor them." Clay looked at her, watched how the light fell against her cheek, how her chest rose slow and steady with each breath. "Taya," he said, "you're not what I expected, but you're what I want." She turned to face him, not smiling, just steady. He stepped forward. Her fingers twitched, then rested lightly against his waist as he moved slow, deliberate. He touched her face, palm to cheek. Her skin was warm from the sun. He hesitated. She didn't. The kiss wasn't rushed. It wasn't desperate. It landed with a weight that felt earned, like a door being opened after sitting locked for years. Their lips met and held, quiet and real. When they pulled apart, she didn't look away. Neither did he. That night, they sat by the fire inside. Taya rested against his side, legs curled beneath her. Clay's arm wrapped around her shoulder, not for comfort, not out of need, but out of choice. They didn't speak. The room didn't need it. Later, she stood, walked to the window, and looked out. "I never thought I'd stay anywhere this long again," she said. "You thinking of leaving?" "No," she said quickly. "Then, I'm thinking of what it means not to." The moon was high. The land was quiet. She walked back to him, sat down, and this time leaned fully into his chest. He pulled her closer. "We're not rescuing each other," she said into the dark. "No," he said. "We're choosing to stay." And she kissed him again, slower, deeper, not because she had to, because she could. The sun rose slow and gold over the eastern ridge, warming the fields one row at a time. Clay was already outside by then, standing near the shed, arms crossed, watching two doves peck at seeds along the garden fence. He didn't call for Taya. He didn't need to. She'd be up soon, and he knew it. These days, she woke before the light fully reached the floorboards. When the door opened, it made no sound. She stepped out barefoot, dressed in the same cotton skirt she'd worn all spring, her hair tied back with a strip of cloth. She didn't speak. She just stood beside him, looked out over the soil they had turned together. The house behind them was quiet, warm, lived in. The windows were open now. The air smelled like tilled dirt and firewood. There were fresh lines carved into the porch post, small, even marks Taya had made over the last week. Every one meant something. Days worked, rows planted, nights passed without nightmares. "Something's changed," she said. Clay nodded. "Feels different." She placed a hand over her belly. He turned to her. "Watch her face." "You sure?" he asked. She nodded. He didn't speak for a long moment. Just reached out and laid his palm over hers, felt the warmth of her skin, the steadiness of her breathing. I didn't think I'd get to have this again, he said. You didn't ask for it. You didn't either. They both looked out again that he didn't ask if she was afraid. She didn't ask if he was ready. They knew. Later that week, Clay went to town alone for supplies. The townsfolk watched him, some longer than others. But nobody said anything about the woman anymore. Word had spread. She wasn't just passing through. She wasn't a burden. She belonged that he bought sugar, coffee, more cloth, and a small knife with a carved handle. A gift. Something useful, something lasting. When he returned, Taya was on the porch, whittling wood into shapes, a habit she'd picked up quietly. She smiled when she saw him. Not wide, but real. He handed her the knife. Her fingers traced the edge. It's good, she said. I thought maybe you'd want to carve something else. She stood, walked to the post, and for the first time, carved letters out a name. Hers, under it a smaller space. Left open, Clay saw it. Said nothing. He reached into his pocket and pulled out the old wedding band. He hadn't touched it in over a year. He looked at it, then set it beside the knife. I kept it, he said, for a long time. Taya looked at it, then back at him. You still carrying it? She asked. Not anymore. She held his gaze. Then carve your name too. So he did. Later, she took the ring and placed it inside the drawer, next to a new one she'd made from a strip of leather and a bead from her old dress. 2 rings. No ceremony. No audience. Just a shared drawer. That summer, Clay built a cradle that he didn't say why. He didn't explain. She watched him work, didn't interrupt. When it was done, she stood beside it, placed her hand over the smooth edge. Her thumb traced a knot in the wood. She said nothing. He stood behind her, his hand resting on her waist. That night, Taya moved her boots away from the door and left them by the window instead. And when she went to sleep, she left the stone on the table. Outside, the field stretched wide and green. The wind moved slow. They had both lost too much, but they had stayed, and in that they found everything. The snow didn't melt all at once. It pulled back slowly, first from the edges of the porch, then from the south side of the house, then from the long curve of the garden row where Clay had buried the compost months back. The ground underneath was soft but stubborn. Taya stepped into it with her bare feet, pressing her toes into the thawing earth, leaving tracks that sank but didn't fill back in. She stood with her arms crossed, looking out over the field. No words, just breath, visible in the morning cold. Clay came up behind her with the seed bag slung over one shoulder and the shovel in the other. He didn't speak either. They didn't need to. He watched her silhouette against the breaking frost. Her hair was tied with cloth, dark against the gray morning. The shirt she wore was faded but fit snug across her back. She'd sewn the buttons tighter 2 weeks earlier. He'd watched her do it, sitting across from her at the table, both of them sipping coffee, not talking. She turned and nodded. They began the work. He broke the earth with steady thrusts of the shovel, arms taut, shoulders low. She followed behind him, hands sorting the roots from the soil, setting seed where the earth opened. They moved in rhythm, without instruction. The chickens clucked from the coop. The sky lightened. The air smelled of damp wood and ash. Taya didn't hum, but her lips moved like she was thinking of something old. Clay noticed and said nothing. He liked the way her hands worked, precise, sure, not rushed. She had learned to match his pace. Or maybe he'd learned to match hers. The BY midday. Sweat lined his collar and a smear of dirt ran across her cheek. She wiped it with her forearm, then leaned against the fence post. Her chest rose and fell with effort. Her blouse clung where she hadn't buttoned the top, just enough to show the curve beneath, visible, real, but not meant to tease. He caught himself staring. She caught him too. She didn't look away. He glanced at the sky. 3 more rows, he said. She gave a small nod. We finished before dark. That's how they mark time now, not by hours, but by light. Around mid-afternoon, a rider passed on the road. Not fast, just trotting. Young man, maybe 20. Clay didn't know his name, but recognized him from the market. He slowed near the fence, looked straight at Taya, held the stare too long. Taya didn't flinch. She kept digging. Clay didn't wave, didn't speak, just stood upright, straightened his shoulders and waited. The rider tipped his hat. Not kindly, then rode on. Taya spat into the dirt and wiped her hands on her skirt. They always look. Clay didn't answer right away. Let them. Does it bother you? Yeah, he said, but not enough to make me stop standing beside you. She went back to work. Later, after the rows were done and the tools cleaned, they sat on the porch with 2 mugs of warm cider between them. The sun was nearly down. Clay rolled his shoulders, wincing at the pull in his back. You're slower than last spring, she said, hiding a small smile. I'm older than last spring. I could have done those rows alone. I know. She leaned back, pulled her knees up, blanket around her shoulders. Her dress tugged slightly across her chest again as she shifted. Clay saw it. She saw him see it. Still, no words passed. You regret it? She asked suddenly. What? Bringing me here. Keeping me. He didn't hesitate. No, even when they stare, I don't live for them. She looked down, rubbing the rim of her mug with one finger. I still wait for someone to come for me, she said. No one's taking you. You don't know that. I know what I'll do if they try. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't touch her, but the weight in his words stayed in the air between them. She leaned her head against the porch beam, eyes half closed. Then I'll stay, she said. That he didn't move, but his hand, slow and careful, reached across and rested on her leg. Just above the knee, her hand moved over his, not gripping, just staying. As the light faded from the sky and the earth cooled beneath their feet, nothing else needed saying. They were in the open now. The thaw wasn't just in the soil, the IT was between them too. The wagon creaked under the weight of supplies. Sacks of oats, a crate for nails, and an old barrel refitted for flour. Clay guided the reins with one hand and kept the other loose near the rifle propped beside his seat. He wasn't expecting trouble. He never was. But the town didn't forget things easily. And the last time he brought Taya to Ash Ridge, folks had only stared. That was before she'd taken his hand in front of the house. Before they started using words like we. Taya sat beside him in a long brown dress, her boots polished, hair tied back with a strip of woven cloth she'd made herself. Her face was clean, her shoulders squared. She wore no shawl, no hat to hide under. When the town appeared on the ridge, she didn't shrink. Clay didn't ask if she was ready. She didn't need to be. They passed the mill first. Empty, silent, while turning lazy in the low creek. Then the schoolhouse, then the livery, where 2 boys paused their work to stare. Taya looked straight ahead. In the market square, Clay pulled the wagon to a stop. The usual crowd moved slow between stalls. Salt pork, dried apples, tools, oil lamps, scrap fabric. Voices were low, as they always were on cold spring mornings, but the stares were louder. Taya stepped down first. Quiet, deliberate. Her boots hit the dirt, and she brushed off her skirt. She didn't cling to Clay. She didn't hide behind him. She walked beside him as he shouldered the empty grain sack and led the way toward the general store at a woman at the textile stall. Older, round-faced, 2 mini rings on her fingers. Watched Taya with narrowed eyes, then leaned into another woman and whispered. Taya heard it. Clay heard it. Neither said a word. Inside the store, Samuel Poe stood behind the counter. His hands were already tensing, eyes flicking between them. He cleared his throat. Morning, Clay. Morning. Poe glanced at Taya. You, need your usual? Plus 2 bolts of thread, the dark kind, and a new saw blade. Right. Poe turned, grabbed the blade from a shelf, then moved toward the back to fetch the thread. As he walked, he muttered, not loudly, but not softly either. A lot of folks ask questions, Clay, about what's proper. Clay didn't react. Taya's hand rested lightly on the edge of the counter. She didn't blink. When Poe returned, Clay placed a coin down flat on the wood. You selling supplies or opinions today? Clay asked, voice even. Poe stiffened but didn't reply. He took the money. They stepped out into sunlight again. As they walked the row of stalls, the stares continued. A child pointed. His mother yanked him back. A few men near the blacksmiths watched Taya's hips as she passed. One of them let out a low whistle. Clay stopped walking, turned. The man, lean, unshaven, dust on his collar, looked up with a grin. Didn't know Apache came in housebroke. Clay didn't speak. He didn't reach for his rifle. He just stepped forward, close enough that the man's grin faded. She's not yours to look at, Clay said. The blacksmith looked up from his anvil. The man shifted his weight, then spat and walked off. Clay turned back. Taya stood still. Sorry, he said. You didn't do it, she said. They moved on. Before leaving town, Taya stopped at a stall selling books and picked up a small, battered copy of Robinson Crusoe. She turned the pages gently, eyes trailing the faded print. Clay paid for it without asking on the ride back. The wind picked up. Taya held the book in her lap. Still think it's worth it? She asked. Clay kept his eyes on the road. I never thought it wouldn't be. I wanted to walk away, she said. In front of that stall. When they stared. I know, but I didn't. I know. She looked over at him. You didn't speak up back in Ash Ridge the day you paid for me. I wasn't ready then. And now. He turned to her. I am. She let the words settle. Then reached for his hand, fingers sliding into his like they'd done it 100 times. He held it tight and didn't let go until they were home. The smoke appeared just after sunset, thin, pale, and deliberate. Not the random curl of brush fire or the wild snap of lightning. This was a signal. Controlled. Chosen. It rose from the tree line beyond the far field, about a mile off, where the land dipped toward the old hunting trail. Clay spotted it first while loading the last of the dry wood onto the pile beside the barn. He didn't react immediately, just watched it. Taya stepped onto the porch with a bowl in her hand and followed his gaze. She didn't ask. She didn't need to. Her body went still. They're Apache, she said after a long silence. They wouldn't send smoke unless they wanted it seen. Clay nodded once. How many? Hard to say. Not many. They move light now. You want to go out there? No. They want me to come. That's why they did it. He looked at her then. She was standing straight, the bowl steady in her grip, but something behind her eyes shifted. Not fear. Not exactly. Something more layered. Older. They're not scouts, she said. They're kin. He stepped forward. You sure? Taya nodded. Yes. The wind shifted, carrying the faint scent of burned cedar. Her fingers tightened on the bowl. I'll set a fire near the edge of the property. Let them know they can come in peace. Clay didn't argue. He helped her gather kindling. And just before dark, they built a small fire down near the creek bed, where the old path widened. Taya stood alone beside it as the sky darkened. Clay waited at the fence line. He didn't follow. He knew better. They came at full dark point, 3 of them, point 1 older man, gray-streaked hair, wrapped in a worn buffalo hide. 1 woman, maybe Taya's age, with sharp eyes and wind-burned cheeks. And a boy, no older than 10, whose bare feet made no sound on the pine needles. Taya greeted them in a language Clay didn't understand. The words were short, clean, sparse. Her voice changed when she spoke it. Lower, more rhythmic, less cautious. The older man nodded at her, spoke once, then looked toward Clay. Taya raised a hand. He's not your enemy. The woman stared longer. Her eyes settled on Taya's dress, her boots, the silver chain at her neck Clay had given her weeks ago. There was no insult. But the weight of the stare was clear. Taya spoke more, then stepped aside and let them sit by the fire. They talked for a long time. Low voices, small gestures. The boy leaned against Taya at one point. She touched his hair, smiled briefly. Clay saw the smile from the field, saw how quickly it faded. When the group stood again, the woman pulled something from her satchel, a piece of cloth, red and ochre, knotted at the corners. She handed it to Taya. Taya unfolded it. Inside were beads, hair ties, a bundle of dried herbs. Things from before. Taya didn't cry, but she held them like they were pieces of a name she hadn't said in years. The woman said one more thing, longer this time, and touched Taya's shoulder. Then they left. No fire was left behind. Taya came back slow. The bowl still sat where she'd left it, cold now. Clay didn't move until she reached the steps. You okay? He asked. They're from my mother's cousin's line, she said. They've been walking from the southern camps. Found my brother's grave. They built a marker. He nodded. They wanted me to come with them. So we'd make a new circle, a new camp. Clay stayed quiet. She looked at him. They don't understand why I stay with a white man who barely speaks. Why I sleep in wood walls instead of under the stars. Why I let people look at me like I'm something to be questioned. He held her gaze, said nothing, and I told them, she said, voice steady, because he never tried to take anything from me. That was all. They went inside together. No more words that night, but when she slept, she didn't clutch the stone anymore. She held the red cloth instead. The following morning, the air felt different. Not colder, not warmer, just still. Even the chickens moved quieter in the yard, scratching at the dirt with less noise than usual. Clay woke early, but Taya was already gone from her bed. Her blanket was folded. The door was cracked. Her boots were missing. He stood at the porch, coffee in hand, eyes scanning the tree line. Nothing but early haze. Then movement. A glimpse of brown skirt disappearing into the woods near the far ridge. She hadn't taken her rifle, just a satchel. He didn't call after her. He didn't go. Instead, he waited. He worked that morning, quiet, deliberate. Fixed the latch on a grain shed, replaced a loose post near the garden. Chopped wood too early in the day. Anything to stay in motion. But his mind circled. Around the look on her face last night. Around the words she hadn't said by noon. He found himself standing on the porch again, arms crossed. She hadn't returned. He didn't eat. The shadows stretched longer across the yard, and the silence grew heavier inside the house. He sat in her chair for the first time. Just sat. His hand rested on the blanket she had folded. The edge of it was still warm when he picked it up that morning. Around dusk, the sky turned the color of old copper. He lit the lantern early, then let it burn low. He thought about what it would mean if she didn't come back. He had no claim on her. Not really. There'd been no contract, no ring, no promise spoken. What they had wasn't written or sealed or held by paper. It lived in things like shared labor, side-by-side breathing, silent meals, and nights spent not needing to speak. He didn't know if it was enough, but he knew he wasn't the same man who brought her home. And she wasn't the same woman who'd stood chained behind a cattle gate. The light faded. The stars showed up quiet. And then, footsteps on the path. He stood without thinking, hand on the doorframe. She emerged from the trees like she belonged to them. Tired, quiet, but walking steady. Her hair was down, her skirt damp with dew. Her satchel hung low on her shoulder. She saw him. She didn't pause. She climbed the porch steps and stopped only when she was close enough to touch him. I sat with them, ate their food, watched their fire, she said. Clay didn't speak. They told stories. They asked what I was doing here, why I would stay in a place where people hate me for the shape of my face. Her voice didn't shake. She was stating facts. I told them I didn't know the answer. Not yet. Still, Clay didn't speak. I needed to be with them for a night, to remember where I started, to listen. She looked up at him then, but I didn't sleep. His jaw tightened. I watched the stars all night, she said, and I waited for daylight. And when it came, I started walking. I didn't think about it. My feet just moved. Toward here. Clay stepped back, gave her room to pass. She walked inside, set the satchel down, took off her boots, then turned. I don't belong to them anymore, she said, but I'll always be of them. You understand that? I do. She nodded. Then she walked to him. Not rushed, just sure. Her hand touched his chest. Flat, steady. He didn't speak. He just placed his hand over hers. And that was it. She stayed. Sanuda Din. Write Part 2, Chapter 5-Story Soil Dedi. Part 2, Chapter the Land Dispute by Early Summer. The earth had dried enough for the hard ground to crack beneath the wagon wheels. Clay noticed it while hauling firewood from a shed. Deep fissures where water once soaked and now split the land wide. He didn't like it. Drought made folks nervous. Nervous men made poor neighbors. Eli Barton was never a good one to begin with. The first time Clay saw him that year was at the east boundary, where his own fence ended and Barton's cattle trail began. Clay was mending a broken gate post when he heard the hoofbeats. Eli came riding slow on a roan mare, rein slack, eyes scanning the fence line like he already owned it. Clay straightened. Didn't wave, just waited. Eli pulled up close, one boot still dragging the dust. You've been planting close, he said casually. Real close to where our markers used to run. Clay didn't move. Your markers are 20 yards east. Always have been. Eli smiled. Lines shift. Fences rot. Memory ain't what it used to be. Clay said nothing. You got no papers on that strip? Eli added, nodding toward the field between them. Just word from a man who's been dead 2 years. It's my land. It's land I could use. Behind them, the wind kicked dust across the row. Eli leaned forward in the saddle. Truth is, Clay, folks are talking. You hold up with that Apache woman like she's your wife. No ring, no church, no word from the law. Clay's grip on the gatepost didn't change. Eli went on. You keep playing house with her, you're going to find this town a lot smaller. Less friendly. She has a name. Clay said finally. You want to speak? Use it. Eli chuckled. You think a name changes what she is? Clay looked up then. Steady. Silent. Eli didn't smile as wide after that. The next morning, Clay set new boundary stakes. Tall ones. With fresh rope. He didn't speak to anyone about it. Just hammered them in, one by one, from the edge of the fence down through the disputed row. Taya stood nearby, watching. She didn't offer help. She didn't need to. When it was done, he pulled a burned piece of wood from the fire, walked to the nearest post, and carved one word. Mercer. Taya ran her fingers across the letters later that evening. Her face didn't change, but she stayed there a long time. The next week, Eli rode by again. Slower this time. Looked at the stakes. Looked at the name. Said nothing. Just spat once and kept riding. Inside the house, Taya hung a bundle of sage above the door. Clay didn't ask why. She said it kept bad spirits from walking in till he let it hang. The days burned longer now. Even before noon, the heat pressed down like a hand. Flies clung to the animals, and the soil cracked wide between the corn rows. Clay worked with his shirt off most afternoons, sweat soaking into the waistband of his trousers, boots scuffed and dry from miles of pacing the fields. Taya tied her hair back with a strip of linen, her skin darkened by sun and dust. She didn't complain. She never did. But her silence lately held something heavier than usual. That evening, they ate on the porch again, just beans, pan bread, a sliced apple. No words, just the scrape of cutlery and the wind dragging warm air across the hills. The lantern on the table flickered with a weak flame. When they finished, Taya didn't move. She stayed with her hands in her lap, the bowl empty, her eyes on the horizon. You're quiet, Clay said. I've been remembering. Bad things? No, not exactly. She leaned forward, elbows on her knees. I was thinking about the day you bought me, she said flatly. Clay tensed, his hand pausing near the lantern. You don't have to. I do, she interrupted. Because I never said thank you. Not for taking me. Not for staying quiet. Not for keeping me. You don't owe me anything. I know that, she said. But I owe myself the truth. Clay waited. I expected you to use me. Or trade me. Or leave me out there when it got hard. I didn't trust you. Not even when you didn't ask anything of me. Her voice cracked slightly, but you didn't sell me. You didn't leave me. Clay looked down at his hands. Rough, lined, burned from sun and wood and years. I didn't know how to save you. I just knew I couldn't walk away. Taya turned toward him. You didn't save me, she said. You stayed. That's different. Clay didn't breathe for a second. Then, I'd stay again. Her eyes searched his face. Even now? Yes. A long moment passed. The cricket started up near the fence line. She leaned in. Their kiss wasn't rushed this time. It wasn't uncertain. Her hand touched the side of his face first, and he let her guide it. When their lips met, it was warm, grounded, certain. No fear, no hesitation, just breath shared in the weight of everything unspoken finally resting. When they parted, she didn't pull back far. She rested her forehead against his. I never had a man who didn't want something, she whispered. You do now, he answered. She closed her eyes, and in that silence, something shifted. No more waiting, no more wondering. She was his woman, and he was hers. The storm came from the south, low and dark, rolling fast across the horizon like it had purpose. Clay saw it while setting the last post in the pasture. The wind hit first, sudden and warm, pushing dust across the field and sending the chickens into a panicked shuffle. He dropped the hammer, straightened, and scanned the sky. Taya came out from the garden with a basket half full. Her hair stuck to her temples, eyes squinting at the clouds. That's not a passing thing, she said. No, Clay replied. We need to tie the barn down. They move quickly. No talk, just motion. Clay unlatched the upper hay doors, secured them tight with wire. Taya ran ropes across the feed barrels, closed the shutters on the chicken coop, grabbed the drying cloth from the line. The wind screamed louder now, high-pitched, hungry. Dust lifted in sheets, blinding at times up by the time they made it back to the porch. The sky had turned a flat, ugly gray. Then the first flash of lightning lit the edge of the trees. Clay didn't move. That IT hit again. Closer. The thunder followed fast, loud enough to rattle the window panes. Then came the crack. Loud, close, real. Not thunder. Clay turned toward the barn just in time to see the smoke. He was moving before his mind caught up. "Taya, the water barrels," he shouted as he sprinted across the yard. She was already on them. 2 buckets in hand, skirts hitched. The top of the barn glowed orange, smoke pushing out through the loft. Clay grabbed the ladder, climbed fast, kicked the hatch open. The flames were already licking across the rafters. He shouted down. "Throw it." She tossed the first bucket. He caught it clumsily, doused the right corner. The fire hissed, but didn't die. He stomped it with his boot, grabbed a tarp, swung it hard across the second blaze. Taya ran for more water. The smoke choked him, burned his eyes, clawed at his throat. But he didn't stop. That'd be why the time the last bucket hit, the fire had weakened. Clay beat at the remaining flames with the tarp until only smoke remained. He stayed on the ladder, breathing hard, soaked through. Below, Taya stood, shirt clinging to her skin, chest rising and falling like she'd been running for miles. Her braid had come undone. Strands plastered to her face. He climbed down slowly, coughing. They stood a few feet apart, steam rising from their clothes, their hands blackened with soot and ash. "Saved it," she said quietly. He nodded, catching his breath. "Just barely." She looked at him then, really looked at the burns on his forearm, the soot on his face, the blood from a split knuckle. "You went up there without thinking. You came with the water without being asked." They stared at each other, breath still sharp. Then she moved, walked straight into him, chest to chest, arms around his shoulders. He wrapped his arms around her waist, held her tightly, like everything still burning was behind them now. Their bodies were soaked. Their breath was hot. The world around them smelled of smoke, mud, and sweat. He pressed his face in her neck. She gripped the back of his shirt. No kiss. No words. Just this point, 2 people who had chosen not to run. Together, they stood in the smoke and fading storm, soaked to the bone and stronger than they'd ever been. The next market day came with clear skies and dry heat. The dirt road was soft under the wagon wheels, the kind of dust that stuck to everything. Clay didn't wear his best shirt, but he buttoned it clean, shaved that morning, even pulled on the boots he'd taken care to oil the night before. Taya wore her darkest dress, the one with the high collar and the subtle blue thread she'd sewn into the cuffs herself. Her hair was braided down her back. No shawl, no hat. They rode into Ash Ridge side by side, shoulders almost touching. The square was full already. Carts lined up, barrels stacked, horses tied to rails in every direction. The usual smells: sweat, livestock, coffee dust. Voices low and sharp. The chatter shifted when they stepped down from the wagon. People noticed. They always did, but this time was different. Taya didn't hover at his side. She didn't lower her eyes. She walked beside him, upright, her movements calm, deliberate. Clay carried the list in one hand, the other resting near the curve of her back when the crowd thickened. They stopped first at the dry goods stall, then the blacksmith, then the grain shop. That a few men nodded to Clay but avoided Taya's eyes. Some women turned their backs. A child stared. Taya stared back. They were nearly finished when Eli Barton appeared, leaning on a post beside the supply shed. His shirt hung open at the collar, suspenders loose, a rolled cigarette tucked behind his ear. He waited until they passed, then spoke, loud enough to carry. "Hell of a thing," he said, "bringing livestock to market dressed like that." Clay stopped. Taya did too. Slowly, Clay turned to Barton's eyes were locked on Taya, smile crooked, stance easy. "Or maybe she's not livestock anymore." Barton went on, voice dripping. "Maybe now she's just your entertainment. Either way, folks are starting to wonder what exactly she is to you." Clay didn't flinch, didn't raise a fist, didn't raise his voice, he stepped forward, just one step, enough to close the distance between them. "She's my woman," he said. Clear, flat, final. Taya looked up at him, something between disbelief and quiet fire behind her eyes. Barton blinked. The crooked smile died, and no one said a word. Clay didn't say anything more. He turned, walked back to Taya, took her hand, and led her through the crowd. This time, no one followed them with their eyes. They all looked down. Back at the wagon, Clay helped her up without a word. Taya stared straight ahead for a moment, her hands folded in her lap. Then she whispered, "You didn't need to say that." "I wanted to." She looked at him. "You weren't afraid?" "I've been afraid plenty of times. But not of them. Not anymore." She reached for his hand, laced her fingers into his like it belonged there. When they rode out of Ash Ridge, the sun was behind them, but over the stairs. The summer burned on, dry and bright, but the land held. The crops came up clean, green rose, standing tall in the sun. The chickens laid steady. The bees returned to the wildflowers along the creek. The fence posts held strong where Clay had driven them deep. The fire hadn't taken a barn. The storm hadn't taken a roof. And no one had come up the road in weeks. Peace, like everything else in Clay's life, had been earned one small piece at a time. That morning, he carried a fresh-cut cedar board from the barn to the front yard and set it across two sawhorses. Taya came out after him, wiping flour from her hands, her face lit with curiosity. "What's that?" she asked. He didn't answer right away. "Just started carving." She stayed near, arms folded, one foot pressed to the porch rail, watching the shape take form beneath his blade. The letters emerged slowly, clean and wide. "Mercer." She stepped closer, ran her fingers along the edge, feeling the grooves. "You making a sign?" "For the gate," Clay said. "Figured it's time folks knew who lives here." She looked at him, direct, steady. "Not just you." "No," he said. "Not just me." He sanded the board clean. She held the nails while he mounted it above the entry post. The wood gleamed under the afternoon light. She stared at it for a long time, her face unreadable. "I never had a name on anything," she said quietly. You do now." They walked the land that evening, past the coop, through the rows, down to the water where the trees bent low and the air smelled like grass and ash. They sat under a cottonwood, knees touching. Her head rested on his shoulder. "I was afraid for so long," she whispered, "that if I stayed, something would break. Or be taken." "It wasn't fear that kept you," Clay said. "It was strength." She tilted her face up to him. "You still carry the ring?" "No," he said. "I carry you now." The wind moved gently through the trees. Dusk settled like a blanket across the field. When they walked back to the house, Clay opened the door for her, the way he always did. But this time she stopped at the frame, turned, and touched the beam beside it with her fingers. Then she reached in her satchel and pulled out the red cloth, the one her kin had given her that night by the fire. She tied it to the porch rail, carefully, with a knot only she would understand. Clay watched her without speaking. "It's not to say goodbye," she said. "It's to say I remember." He nodded. "I'll remember with you." Inside, the cradle waited near the hearth. She paused at the sight of it, walked over, placed her hand on the edge. The wood was smooth now, stained with oil, carved with small symbols on one side. Mountains, water, fire, a horse, and one more. Two lines crossed gently in a pattern she had taught him. She turned to him. No words this time, just eyes that held nothing back. They stood together in the center of the room, no distance left between them, and questions, and doubts, just belonging. Quiet and absolute. The sign outside read Mercer, but inside it meant home.